I'm always fascinated with anyone who went solo like pre 2023 because you beat the rush by a long shot. So I'm curious, well, what did you know or what was your motivation? Like, how did you decide that you were going to go out on your own way back then when it wasn't so, it seems rather obvious now, but back then, not so obvious.
Yeah. You know, I always say that the solo life really chose me, or at least the founder life chose me. I don't want to say it wasn't intentional, but it definitely wasn't planned. I worked for two VC funded startups here in Atlanta. And one I was head of demand gen and the other I was head of marketing. And both of those roles, for various reasons, had layoffs. And so by the second layoff, and before I went into startup world, I ran marketing for like a tech consulting firm also here in Atlanta for about like 5 years. So I had all of this like enterprise consulting experience already. Going into startups, it was all about execution and growth and moving as quickly as possible. And by the second startup that I worked for, loved the company, loved the team. Everything about it was amazing. Very challenging product to market. It was a customer data platform. Very, very challenging to market, but
Very sexy platform, like category for sure.
oh yeah. It was so shocking to experience a second company that has to let people go, and it just kind of rocked me to my core that I just felt like I was more secure on my own than I was working for anybody else. And I had always wanted to start a company and start a business, but I didn't really have a sense for like what kind of scale. And I thought, well, I could go and consult and just see where that takes me. And it turns out what I ended up starting with was not what I ended up doing. I actually started more like marketing execution. Like I basically just like did like demand generation work for folks. But then the more that I did it for different companies, the more that I realized that actually marketing is the least of people's worries, or it should be. It's marketing actually to me is very easy. The hard part is building a product that creates sustainable value over time, that is efficient, and that can actually turn the leads that marketing generates into money. And I think like that was always the thing that I thought was so fascinating. And so that moved me more into strategic growth work, more business consulting. And I still certainly consult on marketing, but usually we find that marketing is not always the culprit. Usually it's something around product, experience, pricing, activation, etc. But that was over the span of like 1 to 3 years, I would say. And then around like year 3 and year 4, I really started to really refine and hone my consulting practice around growth.
This is a huge, like, but tic tac size insight that I think it's often overlooked, which is it's easy to, from the outside looking in, say, oh, well, Aisha does this thing. She's always known it. It's very obvious today, but the trajectory to get there and the series of what I will call, or would consider like kind of a false start where you're doing this thing, you're like, it's just not clicking the way that I want it to, or it's not showing up. It's not creating the difference that I want it to for these businesses, or it's really not solving the root of the problem, like whatever, however you articulate it. And you end up kind of circling it for a bit and then you make some course corrections. You said it took you, was that like a glide path of 3 years of you making these slow changes and IDing new things? Or were you like at the third year, you were like, we make a pivot? Like, what was that like for you?
Yeah, it probably was more, I don't want to say seamless because it definitely didn't feel seamless, but I think it was more gradual. And I think I started to get more and more comfortable with the idea of really building a personal brand around, oh, I'm really more focused on troubleshooting growth than I am just purely marketing. And yeah, I would say it was gradual. It wasn't, I mean, I've been running for Demand Maven now for almost 8 years. Next February will be 8, if I'm not mistaken. And few things have felt so like, like, oh, we're going to plan to do this and go in this direction. And I think it's much more as I have evolved myself and as I've evolved my practice, I think I have naturally drawn those opportunities to myself in that way. And then I'm always looking for like, okay, well, what else is there to learn? What else can I refine or hone? But it doesn't feel like the same type of decision making that like a CEO would make about, okay, like we have to pivot our product or we have to fundamentally change in these like myriad of ways. This was, I think, more kind of like an artist evolves like their vision for the work that they're producing. I feel very similar about the work that I do as a consultant.